All right, we are in Jefferson, Texas at the 26th annual reenactment of the Battle of Jefferson, a battle that never took place, but nevertheless, one of the most interesting reenactments this side of the Mississippi. I'm here with a man named Austin Whitehead. Austin, explain who you are, what you're doing here.
So I am Austin Whitehead. Currently, I am the executive officer of the 15th Texas Infantry. When it comes to the Civil War reenacting side of the hobby, been reenacting with Civil War for about 10 years. Total, I've been reenacting different time periods for roughly 22 years. So, real world, I am a government and economics professor and U.S. history professor high school here in the Longview area.
All right. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about the Reconstruction era, which follows immediately after the Civil War. And I guess a good place to start, Austin, is what were some of the key historical forces that led to Reconstruction, in your view?
So, Reconstruction starts, well, we got to start when the Civil War ended. In 1865, the country is still two pieces, and despite the fact that the Confederate government does officially surrender on all fronts of the war, starting with Lee at Appomattox and then finally finishing up over here in the western part of the United States, which, again, this is 1865. This would have been considered part of the western part of the United States when it comes to the actual states, not territories. We still have two wildly varied parts of the country. The North, which, while yes, did suffer some infrastructure issues during the Civil War, did not have the complete and total destruction of infrastructure, society as a whole, plus the government on top of the society. So we're having to rebuild the country right after 1865. And Reconstruction, we really kind of put a cap around the 1876 era, really with a year when we start getting into the Gilded Age at the end of the 19th century.
Yeah, that leads right into my next question. Different historians have different kind of time frames as to where they begin Reconstruction. Some kind of begin it in 1863 when Abraham Lincoln tries his, free governments in the South and Louisiana and different places. Where do you kind of cap the timeline of Reconstruction?
Like cap it as how far it goes, or when does it begin?
When does it begin? When does it end?
I would still say about 18. While yes, you can make a claim that you're going to start seeing the Union Army start taking over states in the South, you still have the people themselves.
Oh,
Ignore the person who just walked in front. This is a Civil War military camp at this point in time. Reconstruction, partially, when it looks, especially down here in the South, despite the fact that, yes, New Orleans falls, Banks does not take over Shreveport. He does not take over and push the Confederate Army out of Louisiana and Texas. Yes, you get some invasions. So really still, I want to stick with that 1865 date because that's the end of the conflict. And this is when, the Southerners that were pro-Confederate and part of the Confederacy, the question is, well, now what do we do? And that's really going to be 1865. I still say cap. I do like the late 1870s cap, 1876, when we start getting into the Gilded Age, because this is where the United States goes from the pre-industrial eras to, you now have this massive explosion of technology, and almost the creation of our modern systems really start getting pushed, and a lot of the modern concepts in the Gilded Age. So I still say 1865 during the Gilded Age.
Right.
Which is probably more detailed than what some people would put into it, but sometimes it takes a little bit to get full across in your discussion.
Yeah. There's different reconstructions that take place within Reconstruction. A lot of people just look at it as one specific era, but there's a difference between what Abraham Lincoln's plan was versus Andrew Johnson's plan versus the radicals. In your mind, what are some of those key differences between, say, Andrew Johnson and the radical Republicans that came up with their own plan in the late 1860s?
Well, Andrew Johnson almost got impeached. And when I say impeached, not only charges of impeachment in the House, but almost uh, in the Senate as well. He really saw, and from what I've seen, and a lot of people probably agree, some people disagree, but he knew who the leadership of the South had been. He knew who the leadership of the South was going to be coming out of the Civil War. None of the high-ranking Confederate officers and government officials, they didn't go anywhere. They're still there, and a lot of them are going to return from Confederate government and start working with the U.S. government, and they get reelected in the South. And Johnson is really going to be looked at by the radical Republicans as too soft on the South. So you're going to get this radical Republican movement to, okay, yes, they're a part of us, but you do get this movement to almost punish the South and punish the leadership. Was it the right thing? There were some things that the old leadership of the South came back in and started doing that they basically tried to turn the clock back to 1860, and instead of realizing that it's 1865, there's new leadership, things have changed. So was Johnson right in trying being a little bit more lenient on the South? No. Were the radical Republicans correct in some of their concepts? I would definitely say that they were, because they knew change, and they knew if stuff didn't change from how it had been done, it would not have. The whole point of the Civil War and the things that came out of the Civil War and everything that was going to come out of the Civil War would have been non-existent and for naught.
Yeah, so Reconstruction in many ways is sort of a reaction in the North over whether the results of the Civil War are being overturned before their very eyes.
I would agree with that, because look at the slavery issue. You do get the Reconstruction amendments. You get the 13th, 14th, 15th, 13th Amendment in slavery, 14th Amendment citizenship, plus due process for all states, equal protection clause for all states gets put out, and then the 15th Amendment with the African American voting rights, and we call it African American voting rights. It really states that you cannot. Okay, trying to get the actual constitutional wording here. You cannot deny someone the right to vote based on race, color, religion, or national origin. But really, when we look at it, we knew who specifically that was meaning.
Right.
And I do apologize, I'm getting a face full of at the moment.
All right. Well, this leads into the next question about political violence in this era. We tend to think of the Civil War as having a nice, clean ending. Appomattox, the documents are signed, the war is over, peace breaks out. But that's really not what happens, is it? What happens in Reconstruction as regards to political violence?
Well, you're going to have some of the same concepts. You will see the rise of the KKK and other organizations. You're going to see some pro-South organizations. You do see the calling for a lot of the leadership to be arrested and fined. I will say that there were a lot of African Americans who were elected to political positions. If I remember correctly, it has been a long while since I've studied Reconstruction. But there was actually this movement under the Reconstruction to create change, but the military was also involved in overseeing some of this change, especially after the radical Republicans took over and started pushing their concepts. We definitely still see some of the effects of the political violence coming from Reconstruction. There was a lot involved in it.
Courtesy of the Whiteman.
It's a very interesting issue.
Yeah. Let's talk about corruption. What the, a big criticism in this whole era, this Gilded Age era and pre-Gilded Age is the corruption of these governments. What role did corruption play in damaging the reputation of these Reconstruction governments?
Well, I mean, from politicians to generals, a lot of careers were made. A lot of careers were really tampered with some of the corruption that happens in Reconstruction and post-Reconstruction. I mean, Grant. I mean, look at President Grant. A lot of the corruption that surrounds him. I mean, his brother being put in charge of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and some of the allegations made towards him, including allegations of potential corruption that were made, if I remember correctly, from not the best military officer in the world, but I mean, George Custer.
Yeah.
So, corruption was
endemic.
Very endemic. You also have, I mean, the United States, we're seeing this huge explosion of identity when it comes to moving from a agrarian to now industrialization. We're building factories like number 4. Populations are moving. You're going to see the rise of political machines, even more rampant than you do before the Civil War. I mean, Tammany Hall in New York by far was, I mean, Boss Tweed, Tammany Hall, was absolutely corrupted, but he is also, at the same time, corrupted. He is offering jobs and some opportunities to people who benefited from a lot of the changes that are coming out of the Civil War.
Yeah, it's almost like a pre-welfare state. These political machines, aren't they? It's public assistance before it even really started in the New Deal.
Well, public assistance in exchange for votes,
right.
And jobs in exchange for votes and power, and some of the politicians were corrupt and really taking money from, funneling money, taking money from different organizations, definitely from the government when it comes to, oh, well, we're going to build hospitals. Well, I'm in power. I'm going to give the contract to X person who is giving me kickbacks. So we're going to see a lot of political corruption, which is going to lead us to the progressives and the progressivism. I mean, while it's outside of Reconstruction, I mean, there is this movement within the Gilded Age and during Reconstruction of what's happening is not right. There's clearly corruption. There's clear problems. What can we do to fix this? So you're going to get rise to the progressive movement, everything from the temperance movement all the way up through. I mean, Theodore Roosevelt is going to try and fight corruption in New York as both politician until the Spanish-American War, and countless other organizations and groups try and continuously fight the rise of the corruption that not just in politics but in society as a whole. But again, Civil War, the identity of America changes. And Reconstruction, we're still trying to figure out what that identity is. And then the Gilded Age, and we finally start figuring out who we are during the Progressive Era up through the 1920s.
Yeah, one era just kind of leads to another. What caused the 14th and 15th Amendments? What forces led to that?
So when Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation after the Battle of Antietam, which freed slaves in areas controlled by the Confederacy, you're starting to set a precedence. Was it the start of the signing of the 13th Amendment? It's going to take a little bit, but the road's there. A lot of freedmen will join the Union Army. I mean, everybody who has picked up a history book, looked at the Civil War, has heard of the 54th Massachusetts, led by Colonel Shaw, Fort Wagner, who was killed at Fort Wagner. You're going to see a lot of African American men fight in the Union Army. A lot of people, after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, agreed. I mean, the Republican Party, some of the first Republicans, when the Republican Party were founded, they were abolitionists. So we get this war. Was slavery an issue of the Civil War? There is no denying it was a issue. It was surrounding it. The war does bring it to the forefront as a big problem in society. Okay, so the war is over. What are we going to do? I mean, the logical thing is you have these men, brave men, stand shoulder to shoulder, go into the heat of action, fighting for a cause, what they believed in. Why should they not be freed? Why should slavery still exist? And slavery was a terrible thing. It has always been terrible throughout the history of mankind. It has always been terrible. It's a terrible thing. And the Civil War really brought that terror to the people of the institution. So the 13th Amendment had to be done. Okay, so the 13th Amendment, we end slavery. Now what? What do we do with this newly freed group of people? Do we protect them like they should? Which is the 14th Amendment comes along, which is your citizenship. It also creates equal protection for all states. Because a lot of states, especially here in the South, pre-Civil War, you see the rise of black codes, you see the rise of Jim Crow, you see all of these rules to segregate the races and treating these newly freed people unequal. In some cases, in some areas, they basically were treated just like slaves when they were enslaved. So you have to protect these people with the 14th Amendment, plus now with the 14th Amendment, you've got due process of law in all states, equal protection clause. We will later get the term selective incorporation, which is what gives people freedom and equality. Even stuff that's going in the Bill of Rights, you have to remember that the Bill of Rights originally only protected people from federal law, not state law. With the concept of the 14th Amendment selective incorporation, you are getting the protections of the Bill of Rights for everybody. So 14th and 15th Amendment, citizens have the right to vote. So we're freeing slaves, creating freedom in society. Then we are making citizenship equality for these newly freed people. These men have the same rights and protections as all citizens, male citizens of the other 21. Sorry, ladies, not yet. It'll be 1920. So the 15th Amendment is another necessity. The 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments had to happen, and they have benefited and changed this country and still impact this country with the 14th Amendment and what it still does and creates.
So you would say it was not just an ideological, but also a sort of a political necessity after the war.
It was political, ideologically issue, and socially, it was the right thing to do. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments needed to be done. I would have liked to have said that they should have been done a lot earlier. Unfortunately, they weren't, and it took the Civil War to get them. You don't have the Civil War. It would be the 13th Amendment and ending slavery. It would have happened. It would have probably happened a lot later.
Right.
Probably closer into the 20th century, like several other.
Maybe when around the time Brazil ended slavery in the late 1880s or something.
Yes,
of that
Brazil,
nature.
and then you have what the Belgians did to the Belgian Congo
Right.
in the late 1800s, which is another story for another time.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about electoral politics during this era. This is, this seems to be a big point of controversy as to how Reconstruction came to an end. Talk about electoral politics for a little bit.
That's dinner.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so what do you got? Electoral politics. Like, are you talking about electoral college or just how elections were won and lost?
The elections themselves, yeah.
So the elections themselves, again, there's a lot involved in that. Across the South, you're going to see, a lot of the Confederate leadership is going to come back into play. They will be elected in some positions. You're also going to see Republicans are going to be elected to the White House over and over again. It's interesting. When you look at the politics of the era, Reconstruction kind of ends with the final election, which was kind of almost a deal of we elect a Republican president if Reconstruction ends in parts of the South, if I remember correctly. Again, it's been a while since I looked at Reconstruction. It would have been interesting to have lived to see the political world, to see how different it is from our current one. But you definitely knew, I mean, the fighting stopped, but the political ideologies from a lot of people didn't change, especially down here in the South. So there's a lot of forced political change, which again was a necessity in a lot of cases across the country. I mean, I really can't add anything else on that particular issue.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about the elections of the Reconstruction era is how really close they are. We think of elections as being extremely close these days, but the elections of 1868, 1876, 1880, these are extremely close elections between Republicans and Democrats, and the 1876 seems to be probably the most pivotal one. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, that's kind of the final election that leads to the end of Reconstruction, and there you could kind of say there's some reasons why some of those elections are really close, because there's some returns on Southern politics that there were a lot of votes that didn't actually get cast and didn't get counted. There's a lot of attempts to try and keep people from voting, and you've got Reconstructions happening. You got a lot of people against it, and at the time, and they were trying to figure out that yes, we do need to rebuild this country. In the election of 1876, if I remember correctly, it's Hayes. I'm probably getting the date completely wrong.
Yep, 1876, yeah. Hayes.
Okay, it is 76, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting it right. Sorry, guys, it's been a very long day. That one is really when you can see the end of Reconstruction, and that's why a lot of historians call it that, because that one really does strike we'll let Republican here, let's get the troops out of the South, let's get rid of the forced Reconstruction and political changes of the South out of place.
Yeah. What are some of the aspects of the history of Reconstruction that you think historians and the public in general get wrong? What's something that we've gotten wrong about Reconstruction?
I wouldn't necessarily say getting stuff wrong, but there's a lot of people really glance over Reconstruction. In history and history classes, it's the Civil War is over. All right, here's Reconstruction. We're rebuilding the South. We're rebuilding the country.
Right.
Oh, now we're in the Gilded Age. There was so much because, again, the people did not change. They did not have this grand aha moment. It was a phase of
process
of this is how life was, this is how life is now, and getting used to it and really trying to do that for change. Because there were still parts of the South that were, word was getting out that the Civil War was over and slavery was ended a lot later in other places than others. I mean, you get Juneteenth,
right,
is a prime example of when the announcement that the Emancipation Proclamation had been signed, which was signed after the Battle of Antietam in 1863. So here you've got almost 3 years later, and in some cases 4 years. Check it. First tent is Jason's. That one, yes. Sorry, guys are coming in. We've got to get people to understand what was wrong. We've got to get people to understand why it was wrong. And we got to try and as a nation, get past this awful bloody war. I mean, more casualties, more deaths, battlefield deaths took place in the Civil War than any and all other American wars. It was one of the bloodiest conflicts in the world up until World War I when it comes to the 18th and 19th centuries, by far. You know, and it was us against us. It was brother against brother, father against son.
On a per capita basis, it's by far the bloodiest war we've ever fought.
Absolutely. And then we don't count the thousands upon thousands of people who were hit and wounded, and their lives were forever altered due to physical wounds. Plus, you know, during that time period, nobody knew what PTSD was. Nobody knew what and how mental health. So you would have guys who had taken a minor wound in some of the worst battles and some of the bloodiest engagements and the horrific ways that the weapons of the Civil War, which outdated the fighting techniques. Okay, war's over, go home. Resume your life. They didn't grow old. You know, there was this phrase that, you know, World War I soldiers, it's a generation that never grew old. Well, the same thing can be said about our Civil War soldiers. For us, I mean, that so many people were shattered by that, and now we're having to rebuild, and now we're having to try and make this thing work. You know, and it took Reconstruction to really kind of prove that, but it did work. It was a painful process. It was a political painful process and a personal painful process for a lot of people. It's hard to go from shooting somebody one day on a battlefield to we're countrymen again, and now we got to change. It's a process. It's a big learning process across the board.
What's the most commonly overlooked political or social or just any type of aspect of the Reconstruction era in your mind?
Overlooked. Well, the problem is you've got westward expansion. We're expanding westward right after the Civil War, so a lot of things are overlooked. You know, again, we're still doing this identity crisis issue. But honestly, it goes back to kind of what I said a second ago: is what about the common soldier? And you're going to see organizations like the Grand Army of the Republic. You're going to see veterans organizations start this little thing called Memorial Day / Remembrance. You know, it's a Remembrance Day for those who were fallen during the war. I mean, this is, if I remember correctly, again, I'm military and not necessarily.
Decoration Day, Memorial Day.
Yeah.
Remembrance Day was World War I.
Yeah, but we also when the GAR and when we were starting looking at creating Memorial Day, we were kind of throwing several names around, but you know that comes out because we don't even know how many battlefield deaths there were, because you see so many different ranges from 650,000 to I've seen figures as almost as high as 800,000 dead. Plus, you just have the physical and mental toll on countless thousands of people north and south. And for the guys on the line, politics didn't matter when the bullets started flying. It was about the guy next to you. Those people saw horrific things. And when it comes to Reconstruction, the thing that's overlooked, I feel like it's overlooked the most. And it's not necessarily because we didn't want to, it's we didn't know how to deal with the human toll, especially not just for the soldiers, but everybody who is connected to it. Mental health wasn't really looked at. There was no.
They called it soldier's heart.
Yeah, and but it just didn't. It didn't mean anything to the masses. It meant the camaraderie and the brotherhood for the guys who survived it. but did they really survive it?
Yeah.
They endured the life after it, but parts of them, especially the youth, the young soldiers who marched off with dreams of glory, I mean, were injected into the closest thing on earth that you can get is hell.
Yeah.
When it comes to, the cannon and musket fire, rounds of canister being shot at you point blank, and your friends and neighbors, fathers, brothers, just being torn apart right next to you, that's forgotten and overlooked so much when it comes to looking at Reconstruction, because we not only have to rebuild the country, we got to rebuild ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's I think it's often overlooked, and not just in the Civil War. There are several instances where that's happened. Most notably, Vietnam.
Yeah.
As well. The Civil War was our biggest one, and there was just so much causes and issues coming out of it.
Yeah. Each generation has to learn those lessons over again. Last question: what historical legacies of Reconstruction are still living with us today?
When's the last time you heard somebody call somebody from up north a Yankee? Do we still have Southern pride? I mean, you've got aspects of the divisions that were created before the Civil War, and those divisions really start back from way before the Civil War. But we still have some issues in Reconstruction. I mean, we're still challenging aspects of the 14th Amendment, what it looks like.
Birthright citizenship.
We just had a Supreme Court case that walked back voting districts in Congress by race. The 14th Amendment should have answered that. Plus, you have previous court cases. What does equality look like? What does due process look like? Should it look different for people based on race, color, creed, national origin?
Who is a citizen to begin with?
I mean, all of that should have been solved, and we're still dealing with it, because Reconstruction, the time period is over, but some of the issues, this is a massive geographic area of a country. People from Europe talk about, Americans don't travel a lot outside of their country. Okay, you're right. They can drive 4 hours in mainland Europe and go to 3 countries. I drive 4 hours. I'm still in Texas. I am closer to the Atlantic Ocean than I am to El Paso in my own state, because I've done it before. I can drive from here to Atlanta, Georgia, in the same time that it takes for me to drive from here, and we're in Jefferson, Texas, which is about 35 miles from the Louisiana border off of I-20. I can drive from here to San Antonio in the same length of time that I can drive from here to Atlanta, Georgia. Don't ask me how. No, I'm just kidding. On the speed, but it's okay. My geography is a little off based on the time span, depending on how fast I drive. But you get the idea. This is a massive country. We're still got some division. We still have that north-south division. We still have some ideological and political divisions. The Civil War, one of the big issues that started the Civil War was the Democratic Party split, had 3 candidates running for president. And then you have the surprise Republican win in Abraham Lincoln because the Democratic Party was split into 3. There's a lot of different things politically that come from this. You can look at the different past elections where people, you've got third-party candidates running that steal votes from both Republican candidates and Democratic candidates. That's looking at pre-Civil War, same concept issues. And honestly, despite the fact that Reconstruction ended 150 years ago,
We're still living in it.
there are still some people who haven't changed. There's still organizations that take and look at people and treat them differently based on their physical aspects, whether it's race, color, creed. And then you have, when you take into religious persecution, some of the same concepts, because yes, even some religions were not treated fairly in the United States, specifically Catholics in the 18th and 19th century were not well looked on. Sometimes it kind of sounds like I'm talking about today.
Yeah.
And it's really sad because, you know, we are at another political ideological crossroad. The United States is currently, still looking for its new identity for what this new century. While I say new, it's 2026. We're still in a new century. We're trying to figure out who we are. Hopefully, people look at the catastrophes that we've gone through and how we managed to overcome those and move forward to find and settle our differences easier. We'll see what happens.
Hopefully we can learn those lessons. All right, thank you, Mr. Whitehead. Thank you so much.